Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Caitlin and I upload a whole bunch of different types of videos on this channel, mainly surrounding true crime and psychological cases, as well as a little bit of fashion and lifestyle sprinkled in where I can. Now today I'm back with another case. This is another solved case because, as I mentioned in my last solved video, I always get requests for more of these solved cases. I guess you guys like me like knowing that there are cases out there, as tragic as they are, that do receive some sort of justice with it being solved, with someone being blamed and reprimanded for it. Today we're going to be talking about the solved death of HELLE CRAFTS. Just going to say a very quick specific disclaimer before I get on into my general disclaimer that I apologise in advance if there's any issues with mispronunciation. There are a lot of names and places and things that aren't the easiest for me to attempt to pronounce, so I don't want to try. I don't mean to butcher any names or anything. I apologise. I'm just trying my best. And as a general disclaimer that I like to include in my videos, I just want to clarify before I begin that I'm not claiming to be an expert in any of the cases that I solve. I am simply relaying information that I've managed to research myself online with what's accessible for me. So I apologise if I get anything wrong, mispronounce anything, if I forget to include anything. You can always leave anything that you need to add or even just opinions or anything in the comments below. I am only human and I can only access certain information, so I apologise if perhaps you're a little bit closer to any of the cases and you are able to access a little bit more information than me. So I'm not attempting to do anyone an injustice. I don't want to offend anyone, and I'm just trying to portray the cases in the best way that I can in hopes of getting the information out there. I'm also just going to start adding on this little bit of information at the end of my usual disclaimer in all of my videos, that these videos may contain some upsetting or distressing details because by the nature of them, these cases aren't necessarily particularly pleasant to hear about. Some of them can be quite graphic because of what had happened to the victims, so be wary that if you are likely to struggle hearing some difficult details about deaths and things, then please be very wary. Maybe don't watch the videos. It's just probably not the sort of content for you to watch. So I think that's everything to cover. If you want to hear about the case of HELLE CRAFTS, then keep on watching and we shall just get started. HELLE CRAFTS was born on the 4th of July 1947 under the name Helle Lork Nielsen in Charlottenlund in Denmark. Helle had been working as a flight attendant until she had met and married a man named Richard Crafts in 1979, and from here they moved to a place called Newtown in Connecticut to start their lives together. The pair had 3 children together in total, and Helle devoted her entire life to raising these children and making sure that they had everything they could ever need. However, in the year of 1985, Helle learned that her husband Richard had not been entirely faithful in their marriage. He had had a number of secret affairs during the entirety of their relationship, and upon learning this fact, Helle began the process of divorcing him. On the day of November 19th, 1986, Helle had spent the day out and she had received a lift home from a friend. She was still living in the home shared between her and her soon-to-be ex-husband, but obviously it had been about a year nearly since she'd found out about all of the affairs and began the divorce process. It's obviously quite a long and lengthy process that they hadn't really finished splitting everything. They hadn't really found a place to live in terms of sharing money. It was all a bit complicated, and so they were still unfortunately having to live in the same house with their children. And so when she got a lift home that day, this is where her friend dropped her off. But little did this friend know that this would be the last time that HELLE CRAFTS was seen alive by anyone other than her soon-to-be ex-husband Richard Crafts. Over the following few weeks, a number of Helle's friends and family members would attempt to either come into contact with Helle, like ring her up, or even attempt to like organise a meet-up with her. However, they would only ever be able to reach Richard. And Richard would feed them all sorts of excuses as to why Helle couldn't become in contact with them, from being out that day or even as drastic as being in Denmark visiting her mother. There were so many excuses that he gave to different people as to why she wasn't available. And because it was they weren't so drastic, so you know, she was out, she was on the phone, she was in the shower, things like that, they didn't really raise any suspicion because it was loads of people spread over time. It just didn't really raise any suspicion because it wouldn't necessarily seem out of the ordinary. However, as more time passed, her friends became more growingly concerned that they hadn't heard from her at all. No one had seen her in weeks. And what made them even more concerned is that the majority of them were already aware of the issues within their relationship with Helle. Shortly before her disappearing, obviously disappearing without them realising, she had told them that Richard had become prone to violent tendencies and violent outbursts with a particularly short fuse. And one friend, even in retrospect, recalled Helle saying to her, if something happens to me, don't think it was an accident. So as time passed, as you can imagine, they got more and more concerned, and because of this growing suspicion, some of Helle's friends decided to take it upon themselves to make law enforcement aware that she could potentially be missing, or if she isn't missing, they were just generally concerned for her welfare. So because of all the fact that she is missing, as well as the violent tendencies and the issues in their relationship, they just were worried in general. They weren't really sure exactly what they were worried about, but they knew that something was likely wrong. So when local law enforcement heard of this report, basically their first port of call was obviously to visit the family home where Richard Crafts was obviously still living, and they had the intention of just speaking to Richard to see if there was some sort of rational explanation. Maybe perhaps she was travelling abroad, or maybe she just hadn't been able to see any of her friends, and that Richard was able to prove this. Now, when law enforcement entered the home, again, it wasn't an aggressive meeting. They just went in to check up on things, do a sweep just to make sure that nothing iffy was going on. They found a number of weird things. So firstly, they noticed that there were patches of carpet that had been cut up. So select carpet, so imagine like squares of random pieces of carpet being cut up and pulled up from the rest of the carpet. And these pieces of carpet were missing from the master bedroom. Investigators later asked the family's hired nanny if she had noticed anything before the carpet had been dug up, so any stains, any reason why the carpet had been dug up, again looking for maybe some sort of rational explanation. And she said that in passing, it wasn't anything that she looked for specifically, but she does recall a dark stain being on the carpet by the bed in the master bedroom as she was walking past the room. She believed that the stain was about the size of a grapefruit, and it was very dark in colour, that's all she said, leading investigators to, well, they had no choice but to presume that it was likely a blood stain. As well as this, they also managed to find a small blood smear on the side of the bed panel in the master bedroom. And as you can imagine, if Richard Crafts wasn't already looking suspicious, he looked extremely suspect because of what they had found inside the home. They decided that they had kind of just reasoning to begin investigating Richard Crafts a little bit more in depth, and they decided to look at his credit card activity, in which they found quite a number of strange, unusual purchases that were carried out around the time of Helle's disappearance, or when her friends kind of remembered last seeing her. Firstly, he had bought a large freezer, just a lone freezer, that when law enforcement searched his home, found no sign of. He'd also bought a new set of bedding and bed sheets, so not only the covering bed sheets, but also a brand new duvet, everything, as well as a rented wood chipper. And then they also discovered a receipt that shows that he had purchased a chainsaw. Now, from what I can tell, not all of these details were necessarily shared publicly, so they kind of kept a few of these things under wraps as a means of being able to later identify anyone that could have potentially been the actual perpetrator, because people couldn't lie if they didn't know what to lie. So around the time of this discovery, there was also a witness who had basically placed a tip to the local law enforcement saying that he had seen a man matching the description of Richard. So he hadn't said matching the description of Richard Crafts, but he had described the man that he'd seen using a wood chipper near a place called Lake Zoar in Newtown, Connecticut. So this, paired with the fact that they had themselves found evidence of Richard Crafts renting a wood chipper, starts looking a little bit strange, because it doesn't seem likely that this random witness would have made something like this up out of the blue. So this witness had been out at the time in the area using a snowplow due to an aggressive snowstorm that had occurred around the time of Helle's disappearance, or believed disappearance. This was partially why the last night that Helle was seen, she was being given a lift home by a friend. And from here, investigators decided that if these were related, which it would kind of seem unusual, if they weren't related, they decided to head to Lake Zoar, where the witness placed this man using a wood chipper, to see if they could find any pieces of evidence to support any of their theories. So during their search of the actual lake, not only did they find a chainsaw matching the one that Richard had purchased, covered in hair and blood, but also multiple chunks of metals and a whole load of human tissue. This human tissue took the form of teeth, a painted fingernail, hairs, pieces of bone and blood matching Helle's blood type. And they were also able to run a DNA match of the pieces of evidence found on the actual chainsaw, so the blood and the hair found on the chainsaw, and it was confirmed to have matched Helle's. The condition of the evidence they discovered in Lake Zor, as well as Richard's purchasing history, led them to believe that he had fed her through the wood chipper. They tested this hypothesis by feeding a frozen pig through the wood chipper in order to compare the markings found on the remains of the frozen pig with the remains that they found in Lake Zor, confirmed to be HELLE Craft, and all of the markings and everything matched, so this further supported the belief that Richard Crafts had murdered his wife. In regards to the bloodstains found in the master bedroom of their home, it's kind of hypothesised what they believe the likely scenario was that Richard hit HELLE over the head multiple times with a blunt object, hence the large amount of blood found on the carpet. And this is when he placed her in the newly bought freezer found on his purchasing history, when he later transported the remains to the secluded areas of Lake Zor and used the chainsaw to chop up her remains into smaller pieces before feeding her into the wood chipper, aiming it at the lake so all of the remains went straight into the lake, hidden, and ideally to begin the decomposing process. Not only did he hide the evidence of her remains, but he also then threw in the chainsaw, which is where they later found it. Due to the condition that the remains were found in, they weren't able to conclusively state what the cause of HELLE Craft's death was, only through kind of educated speculation, I guess, what they were able to deduce, but there was never anything to conclusively say this is how she died. However, it was enough evidence to take Richard Crafts to trial. So in January of 1987, Richard Crafts was arrested for the murder of HELLE Crafts, and his trial date was set to begin in May of 1988, the following year. His trial went on for nearly 2 months, and because of all the almost inconclusive evidence, it resulted in a hung jury, and so a following trial was set for the following year, which ultimately ended in a guilty verdict. And then in November of 1989, Richard Crafts was sentenced to 50 years in prison without being eligible for parole until the year of 2021. And so that is everything I have to discuss today in the case of HELLE Craft. I hope you found this interesting. Let me know your thoughts down below. As I always say, these solved cases, whenever I film them, they always seem very abrupt to end, but it is quite positive of an ending in the sense that some justice was brought and HELLE Craft's killer was punished. He was sent to prison for 50 years without parole until, well, a couple years time. So at least some justice was found. My heart goes out to HELLE Craft's family and her children, who ultimately suffered as well as HELLE, and I just think this case is awful. Obviously a very twisted man, but at least some justice was served. So that is everything I have to discuss today. Let me know your thoughts down below, as well as if you have any specific cases you'd like me to discuss, because I'm always looking for other cases to research, whether they are solved, unsolved, serial killers to discuss, or even psychological related cases, because you know that I love doing those sort of psychological cases on my channel. Please let me know down below or DM me on any of my social medias. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this interesting, and I'll see you guys soon for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye.